A millionaire man adopted deaf twin girls who had been abandoned on the streets and took them into his home to care for them. One day, he came home earlier than usual and was shocked by what his wife was doing to them. Rain pounded the streets of New York, turning the pavement into a dark mirror reflecting the city lights. Thomas Laurent adjusted his tie, his tired eyes staring at the urban landscape through the window of his top-floor office. The wall clock read 11:30 p.m., reminding him that once again he was the last person in the building. With a sigh, Thomas grabbed his leather briefcase and his umbrella, casting a final glance at the photo on his desk. He and Anne, smiling on a distant beach in days that felt increasingly remote. With determined steps, he headed toward the elevator. The sound of his Italian shoes echoed through the empty lobby. The night guard gave a respectful nod, holding the door open to the storm outside. Thomas hesitated for a moment, watching the heavy raindrops bounce off the asphalt. Opening his umbrella, he plunged into the New York night. His black Audi waited, solitary, in the parking lot. Thomas quickened his pace, eager to escape the cold and damp. That was when a sudden movement caught his attention. On a bench in the small park across from the building, partially obscured by shadows and the curtain of rain, something stirred. Thomas narrowed his eyes, his heart inexplicably beating faster. Two small huddled figures, trembling and holding each other, became visible. For an instant he considered ignoring the scene. After all, a successful businessman wasn't supposed to get involved in potentially risky situations. But something, maybe the emptiness he had been feeling lately, or a remnant of compassion that the corporate world hadn't crushed, made him change direction. Approaching carefully, Thomas felt the air leave his lungs. Two little girls, no more than 5 or 6 years old, identical as drops of water, were crouched beneath a thin, soaked jacket. Golden curls clung to pale faces stained with tears and dirt. "Hello," Thomas called softly, extending his umbrella over the girls. "Are you lost?" The girls looked up, startled. Identical gazes of fear and mistrust stared back at him. Thomas tried again, his voice gentler this time. "Where are your parents? Can I help you find them?" Silence. The twins only clung to each other more tightly, shaking not just from the cold, but also from fear. That was when realization struck Thomas like lightning. The girls couldn't hear him. They were deaf, his heart clenched. He looked around, hoping to see an adult searching for them, but the park was deserted. The rain kept falling mercilessly, and the little ones seemed to have been out there for hours. Thomas hesitated. Bringing unknown children home was insanity, wasn't it? Anne would be furious, but leaving them there, alone and vulnerable, was unthinkable. With a resigned sigh, he made his choice. Using slow gestures and exaggerated facial expressions, Thomas managed to convince the twins to follow him to the car. They moved like frightened animals, clinging to each other as though their lives depended on it. The drive to the Laurent mansion was tense. Thomas glanced frequently in the rearview mirror, studying the two tiny figures in the back seat. They seemed even smaller, surrounded by the luxury of the vehicle, their drenched clothes staining the fine leather. When the gates of the property opened, Thomas felt a surge of anxiety. How would he explain this to Anne? His wife, always so meticulous and averse to surprises, would surely not welcome two unknown, dirty children into her immaculate home. The lights at the main entrance came on before Thomas even parked. Anne appeared in the doorway, her silk robe billowing in the night breeze. Her usually composed face twisted in shock at the sight of Thomas helping the twins out of the car. "Thomas? What? Who are these children?" Anne's voice trembled slightly, her wide eyes fixed on the drenched figures. "I found them abandoned in the park," Thomas explained quickly, guiding the girls inside. "They seem to be deaf. I couldn't leave them out there in that storm." Anne stepped back as though afraid the children might contaminate her with some illness. But what are we going to do with them? We can't just—" Her protest was interrupted when one of the twins sneezed, a small, frightened sound that echoed in the entry hall. Instinct overcame hesitation, and Anne found herself calling for the housekeeper. "Mary, quickly, bring towels and dry clothes, and prepare a hot bath." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The twins, still silent and frightened, were bathed, dressed in soft pajamas, and fed hot soup. Thomas and Anne watched, both fascinated and anxious, as the little ones ate ravenously, as though they hadn't seen food in days. When they were finally taken to one of the guest rooms, the girls clung to each other on the large bed, their huge, distrustful eyes watching every move the adults made. Thomas felt a lump in his throat at the sight of the fear and vulnerability on those small faces. Back in the master bedroom, Anne collapsed at the edge of the bed, exhausted. "What do we do now, Thomas?" "We can't just keep them." Thomas sat next to his wife, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "First thing in the morning, I'll call the police and social services. But tonight, they need a safe place to sleep." Anne nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "They looked so scared, so lost." Thomas pressed a gentle kiss to his wife's temple. "I know this wasn't how we planned tonight, but sometimes the heart takes us down unexpected paths," Anne finished, a small smile tugging at her lips. That night, while the storm raged outside, a different kind of silence hovered over the Laurent mansion. In the guest room, two tiny figures slept curled up together, finding, for the first time in a long while, a moment of peace. And in the master bedroom, Thomas and Anne lay awake, their minds filled with unanswered questions and their hearts inexplicably lighter. Fate had placed Sophie and Claire in their path, and something told Thomas that nothing in their lives would ever be the same. What tomorrow would bring, he didn't know. But one thing was certain. Those girls had found a place in his heart, a place that went far beyond the silence surrounding them. Thomas's office had never seemed so austere as it did that morning. Seated in his leather chair, he stared at the stack of documents before him, each page a reminder of the complex situation he was now facing. Across the desk, the family lawyer, Pierre Dumont, adjusted his glasses, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "So you really want to go forward with this, Thomas?" Pierre asked, his voice laden with caution. "Temporary adoption is not a simple process, especially given the unique circumstances." Thomas leaned back, his eyes straying to the photo of Anne and the twins that now held a place of honor on his desk. The image, taken just a week earlier, showed a hesitant smile on his wife's face, while Sophie and Claire, still shy, nestled close to her. "We don't have a choice, Pierre," Thomas replied firmly. "Those girls need us, and to be honest, I think we need them too." With a resigned sigh, Pierre began laying out the procedures: visits from social workers, psychological evaluations, adjustments to the home. It seemed like an endless list. Thomas absorbed every word, determined to do whatever was necessary. Meanwhile, back at the Laurent mansion, Anne was in a situation she never imagined. Sitting on the plush living room rug, she watched attentively as the sign language instructor they had hired demonstrated basic signs. Melissa, a young woman with a gentle smile and expressive hands, was patiently showing her the fundamentals. "Good morning," Anne signed awkwardly, her hands still unfamiliar with the movements. Across the room, Sophie and Claire observed with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Seeing the once imposing Mrs. Laurent sitting on the floor making gestures was entirely new for them. Melissa smiled encouragingly. "Very good, Mrs. Laurent. Now, how about we try 'How are you?'" Anne repeated the sign, this time with a bit more confidence. To her surprise, Claire, the bolder twin, responded with a small smile and the sign for "fine." Anne's heart raced. It was the first time one of the girls had directly responded to her. She felt a sudden wave of emotion, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The following weeks brought subtle yet profound changes to the Laurent mansion. The silence, once oppressive, now felt alive, filled with gestures, expressions, and a growing mutual understanding. Thomas, always the busy executive, began reserving evenings and weekends exclusively for the family. His hands, once adept only at handling documents and corporate handshakes, now moved clumsily but affectionately as he tried to communicate with the twins. One evening, during dinner, Sophie accidentally knocked over her glass of water. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the dining room, and for a moment everyone froze, waiting for the twins' reaction. To everyone's surprise, Anne reacted first. Gently, she knelt beside Sophie, signing, "It's all right." and accidents happen. The little girl, tears in her eyes, signed back, "Sorry." Without hesitation, Anne hugged her, whispering comforting words that, even though Sophie couldn't hear them, she could feel. Thomas watched, a mixture of pride and admiration swelling in his chest. This was a side of Anne he hadn't seen in years, caring, patient, motherly. The family routine gradually adjusted. Mornings, once filled only by the sound of newspaper pages turning and cups of coffee being emptied, were now enlivened by enthusiastic gestures and timid smiles. Annie, to everyone's surprise, including her own, began waking up earlier to help the twins dress and prepare breakfast. One afternoon, Thomas arrived home earlier and found a scene that left him frozen in the living room doorway. Anne was sitting on the couch, a children's book on her lap, her hands moving gracefully as she told the story in sign language. Sophie and Claire were utterly captivated, their eyes shining with fascination. When Anne noticed his presence, she smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "Come join us, darling," she signed, surprising Thomas with her newfound fluency. "Join our story time." As the days turned into weeks, the Laurent mansion, once a monument to success and perfection, became a home. Colorful drawings began to decorate the stainless steel refrigerator. Small pairs of shoes appeared by the entryway. And, most surprising of all, laughter. Yes, the laughter of children who could not hear but could certainly feel joy, echoed through the hallways. Anne, in particular, seemed to blossom. Her social calendar, once filled with charity events and business dinners, now revolved around sign language lessons, the twins' medical appointments, and afternoons at the park. She threw herself wholeheartedly into Sophie and Claire's silent world, determined to build a bridge of understanding and love. One evening, while Thomas worked in his home office, Anne entered quietly, her eyes shining in a way he hadn't seen in years. "They called me Mummy today," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "In signs, it's of course. But Thomas, they called me Mommy." Thomas stood, pulling his wife into a hug. He felt her tears soak into his shirt, realizing his own eyes were brimming as well. "I always knew you'd be a wonderful mother," he whispered. Anne pulled back slightly, looking into her husband's eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. But Thomas understood everything behind that single word. A thank you for bringing them home on that stormy night, for insisting on adopting them, for believing in her. That night, lying side by side, Thomas and Anne talked like they hadn't in years, about fears, hopes, and dreams for the future. A future now including two little girls who had arrived unexpectedly and filled a void they hadn't even known existed. Across the hall, Sophie and Claire slept peacefully, their hands still clasped together even in slumber. In just a few months, they had gone from abandonment to shelter, from fear to safety, from silence to understanding. The Laurent mansion, once a symbol of material success, now pulsed with something far more precious: love. A love that transcended words, that communicated through gestures, looks, and touch. A love that proved sometimes the heart really can go beyond silence. Fall came to New York, painting the trees in the Lawrence Garden golden red. Thomas watched the leaves falling outside his home office window, a cooling cup of coffee in his hands. His gaze, however, was not truly on the autumn scenery. Something felt different, something he could not quite name but sensed in the air, in the atmosphere of the house. The laughter of the twins, which had become a comforting constant in recent months, seemed more subdued, almost hesitant. A gentle tap on his shoulder pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Mary, the housekeeper, her usually calm face marked by worry. "Mr. Laurent?" she began in a soft voice, as though afraid of being overheard. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Thomas nodded, indicating the chair across from him. Mary sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "It's about the girls, sir. And, well, about Mrs. Anne, too." Thomas leaned forward, giving her his full attention. "What is it, Mary?" The housekeeper hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The twins, they've been different lately. Quieter, more scared, I'd say, especially when they're alone with Mrs. Anne." A chill ran down Thomas's spine. "Scared how?" Mary explained how she had noticed Sophie and Claire shrinking back when Anne walked into a room, how they seemed reluctant to be alone with her. "And there's more," Mary continued, her voice nearly a whisper. "Mrs. Anne, she's been letting a lot of the staff go. Says she wants more privacy for the family." Thomas frowned. It was true that the household staff seemed thinner these days, but he had assumed it was some reorganization Anne had vaguely mentioned. "Yesterday," Mary went on, "I was passing by the girls' room and heard, well, I didn't exactly hear, but I sensed a commotion. When I went in, Mrs. Anne was there, smiling as though nothing had happened, but the girl, they were trembling, sir, trembling and silently crying." Thomas's heart pounded. He wanted to dismiss Mary's concerns as exaggeration, but something in her tone and the seriousness in her eyes stopped him. "Thank you for telling me, Mary," he said at last. "I'll keep a closer eye on things." After the housekeeper left, Thomas remained in his office, his thoughts churning with conflicting emotions. Anne had changed so much over the past months, becoming the loving mother he had always known she could be. How could something be wrong now? Determined to observe more closely, Thomas began paying attention to details he'd previously overlooked. He noticed how Sophie and Claire, once so open and smiling, now seemed to shrink away whenever Anne drew near. He saw the anxious looks they exchanged when Anne announced some activity with them. One afternoon, returning home earlier than usual, Thomas heard muffled sounds coming from the music room. Heart pounding, he approached silently, inching closer with each step. Through a crack in the door, he saw Anne seated at the piano, playing furiously. The twins were beside her, their small hands pressed against the wood, their faces twisted in a mix of concentration and fear. "You need to feel the music," Anne exclaimed, her voice strangely high-pitched. "Even if you can't hear it, you must feel it." "Try again." Thomas looked on in horror as Anne forced the girls' hands onto the keys, making them play a melody they couldn't hear. The twins' eyes were wide, silent tears streaming down their cheeks. He was about to intervene when Anne abruptly stopped, pulling the girls into a tight hug. "Oh, my darlings," she whispered, "you're doing so well. Mommy is so proud of you." Thomas stepped back, confused and disturbed. What was going on? This wasn't the Anne he knew, the loving mother who had flourished over recent months. In the days that followed, Thomas noticed more subtle changes. Anne cancelled the regular sign language lessons, claiming she'd teach the girls herself from then on. Trips to the park, once frequent, became rare. Anne always had an excuse: bad weather, the girls feeling slightly unwell, the need for privacy. The mansion that had become a lively home began closing in on itself. Curtains remained drawn, the phone rarely rang, and Anne seemed constantly tense, as though waiting for someone to show up any moment to take the twins away. One evening, while Thomas worked in his office, he heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Going to investigate, he found Sophie alone, clearly terrified. "Hey, princess," he signed, kneeling to her level. "What's wrong?" Sophie looked around as though she feared being seen, then made a gesture that broke Thomas's heart. She signed Mommy, and then Afraid. Before Thomas could respond, Anne appeared at the end of the corridor. "Oh, there you are, Sophie dear," she said, her voice sweet but underlined with tension. "Come along. It's time for your bath." Sophie cast one last pleading glance at Thomas before Anne led her away. Thomas stood there, in the dark corridor, a knot forming in his stomach. Something was very wrong and he could no longer ignore it. That night, lying next to Anne, who feigned sleep, Thomas stared at the ceiling, his mind brimming with questions and fears. The twins, who had brought so much joy and transformation into their lives, now seemed trapped in a dark mystery. What was Anne doing when they were alone? Why did the once happy, well-adjusted girls now seem perpetually anxious? Most importantly, how could he protect them without destroying the family they'd built? Thomas knew he had to act, but he also feared what he might find out. The silence that once defined the twins now seemed to permeate the entire house, heavy with secrets and unspoken fears. As the night wore on, Thomas made a decision. He would discover the truth, whatever the cost. Because deep in his heart, beyond the love he felt for Anne and the fear of the unknown, There was an unwavering certainty. Sophie and Claire needed him, and he would not let them down. The Laurent mansion, once a refuge of peace and newfound joy, now felt shrouded in tension. Thomas walked the quiet halls, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, feeling like a stranger in his own home. The smiling photos on the walls now looked like masks hiding dark secrets. One Saturday morning, Thomas decided to spend more time with the twins. Entering their room, he immediately noticed something different. The shelves, once full of children's books and small toys, were oddly bare. "Sophie, Claire," he signed, calling the girls who were quietly playing on the rug. "Where are your favorite books?" The twins exchanged worried glances before Claire timidly answered, "Mommy took them. She said we needed new things." Thomas frowned. Anne hadn't mentioned anything about removing the girls' belongings. Curious, he opened the closet only to find it nearly empty, holding just a few sets of basic clothes. His heart raced. What was happening? Why would Anne remove the twins' things without discussing it with him? In the days that followed, Thomas began noticing other strange behaviors from Anne. She spent hours locked in the office, whispering on the phone. Whenever he entered a room where she was alone with the girls, Anne immediately shifted as if caught doing something wrong. One afternoon, returning home early from work, Thomas found Anne agitated, frantically rearranging the music room. "What are you doing, honey?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Anne jumped, nearly knocking over a stack of sheet music. "Oh, Thomas, I didn't hear you come in. I was just thinking of restarting my piano lessons." "You know, for the girls," Thomas studied his wife's face. There was something in her eyes, a mix of determination and fear. "Anne, I thought we agreed that forcing the girls to play piano wasn't a good idea." "I'm not forcing anyone," Anne replied quickly, her voice an octave higher than normal. "They need stimulation, Thomas. We can't just let them fall behind because they're different." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning that Thomas couldn't decipher. He wanted to argue, to say that the twins were making wonderful progress, but something in Anne's expression stopped him. That night, unable to sleep, Thomas decided to do something he never imagined he would. Using his connections, he discreetly arranged to install security cameras in key areas of the mansion. The idea of spying on his own family repulsed him, but his fear for the twins' safety overrode any ethical qualms. The cameras were installed the next day, while Anne took the girls to the doctor, another appointment she insisted on attending alone. Thomas watched the technicians work, feeling like an intruder in his own house. With the cameras operational, Thomas found himself consumed by the need to monitor. Hours of footage piled up, showing mostly mundane daily scenes. But there were moments, brief instants, that made his blood run cold. Anne, usually so composed, had bouts of rage when she was alone, throwing objects and muttering to herself. The twins, once so lively, now roamed the house like tiny ghosts, always glancing over their shoulders. One night, reviewing the day's footage, Thomas saw something that left him frozen. Anne was in the girls' room, rummaging through drawers and closets. She grabbed something, a small journal Thomas recognized as the one he'd given Sophie, and tucked it inside her robe before hurrying out. The mystery grew deeper, and so did Thomas's fear. What was Anne looking for? Why did she feel the need to hide things from the girl and from him? Tension in the mansion was palpable. Meals, once moments of shared joy, were now silent and uncomfortable. Anne talked too much, her voice artificially cheerful, while the twins barely touched their food. Several times Thomas tried to broach the subject with Anne, but she always changed the conversation, sometimes angrily, sometimes in tears. "You don't trust me?" she would ask, her eyes shining in a way Thomas didn't recognize. "After everything we've done, after how I've changed for these girls." One morning, Thomas found Sophie hiding in his office, trembling. When he approached, she signed frantically, "Daddy, please don't let Mommy take us away." Thomas's heart stopped. Take them away? What did Sophie mean? Before he could ask more, he heard Anne's footsteps in the hallway. Sophie, panicking, hid behind the curtain. Thomas barely had time to collect himself before Anne entered, her face a mask of concern. "Thomas, have you seen Sophie?" She's disappeared, and we have an important appointment." Thomas hesitated, feeling Sophie's desperate gaze on him from behind the curtain. "No, darling, I haven't. Maybe she's in the garden." Anne nodded distractedly and left. As soon as the door closed, Sophie ran into Thomas's arms and silently sobbing. At that moment, holding little Sophie trembling in his arms, Thomas knew he couldn't pretend everything was all right anymore. Something dark was happening under his roof, threatening to destroy the family he loved. Heavy-hearted, but resolute, Thomas realized he had to confront the truth no matter how painful it might be. Because in the suffocating silence now dominating the Laurent mansion, the silent screams of Sophie and Claire were louder than any spoken word could ever be. A grey morning dawned over New York, reflecting Thomas Laurent's state of mind. After sleepless nights and days of growing unease, he decided he could no longer postpone the inevitable. He needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful. With an excuse of an urgent matter at the office, Thomas left work in the middle of the afternoon, his heart growing heavier with each mile toward home. The mansion gates had never seemed so imposing, so threatening. Parking silently at the side entrance, Thomas let himself in through the back door, determined not to alert anyone to his early arrival. The silence that greeted him was oppressive, almost tangible. Moving carefully through the familiar yet suddenly alien corridors, Thomas heard muffled sounds from upstairs. His heart pounded as he recognized Anne's voice, though he couldn't make out the words. Climbing the stairs with measured steps, the sound grew clearer. It came from the twins' room. Thomas approached, his hand hovering over the doorknob for a moment before turning it slowly. The scene unfolding before him froze the blood in his veins. Anne stood in the middle of the room, her face twisted with an almost maniacal determination. Sophie and Claire were on the floor, silent tears streaming down their pale faces. Torn pages of what Thomas recognized as the girls' journals lay scattered around them. "You have to forget," Anne screamed, her voice shrill. "Forget everything that came before. I'm your mother now." "Only me." The twins trembled visibly, their small hands clasped together in a desperate search for comfort. Then Anne turned and saw Thomas in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. "Thomas," she gasped, her voice suddenly sweet, as though trying to mask what he had just witnessed. "You're home early, darling." The girls and I were just..." "What's going on here, Anne?" Thomas demanded, his voice trembling with contained emotion. He stepped into the room, instinctively placing himself between his wife and the twins. Anne took a step back, her eyes flicking between Thomas and the girls. "Nothing, darling. We were just having a little chat about the past and the future." Thomas knelt, hugging Sophie and Claire, who instantly clung to him as though their lives depended on it. He could feel their small bodies shaking. "Anne," he said, his voice now steady, "what did you mean by forget everything that came before? Why are you destroying their journals?" Anne's face contorted, rapidly shifting between fear, anger, and despair. "They don't need those memories, Thomas. We're their family now. Only us." Thomas stood slowly, still keeping the twins close. "Anne, you're scaring them. This has to stop now." For a moment, Anne seemed to collapse inward, her shoulders slumping. But then, as though someone flipped a switch, she straightened again, her eyes shining with an intensity Thomas had never seen. "You don't understand, Thomas," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I'm protecting our family. Those memories, that past, they only hurt the girls. I'm healing them." "Healing?" Thomas repeated, incredulous. "Anne, you're traumatizing them." It was as though a dam burst. Anne began speaking rapidly, words pouring out in a torrent. "Don't you see? They need structure, discipline. I'm shaping them to be perfect, without limitations of the past, without the burden of deafness. I can fix it, Thomas. I can make them hear, make them speak." Thomas was horrified as he realized the extent of Anne's obsession. "They don't need fixing, Anne. They're perfect as they are." "No!" Anne screamed, stepping forward. The twins cowered behind Thomas. "You don't understand. I love them so much, Thomas. So much it hurts. And that's why I have to do this, for them, for us. Thomas looked at his wife, the woman he thought he knew so well, and saw a stranger. Her eyes, once filled with love and compassion, now burned with a feverish, almost frantic light. "Anne," he said softly, as though speaking to a frightened child. "You need help. This isn't love. It's an obsession. You're hurting the girls, hurting us all." For a brief moment, Thomas caught a flicker of recognition in Anne's eyes, as if she were coming out of a trance, but then the hardness returned. "You're against me," she whispered, inching toward the door. "All of you, but I'll prove I'm right. I'll save them, Thomas. I'll save our family." With those words, Anne bolted from the room, leaving Thomas stunned, holding the sobbing twins. In that moment, hugging Sophie and Claire, Thomas realized the situation was far more dire than he'd ever imagined. The woman he loved, the mother who had flourished so wonderfully, now posed a real threat to the children they had vowed to protect. With a broken heart yet steely resolve, Thomas knew he had to act quickly. The twins' safety was now his absolute priority. As he soothed them with gentle gestures, his mind raced through the next steps. The truth had been exposed, shocking and painful, but it was only the beginning. The battle for Sophie and Claire's safety and happiness had just begun, and Thomas was determined to protect them at any cost. The silence after Anne's sudden exit was deafening. Still holding the trembling twins close, Thomas took a deep breath, trying to calm his own racing heart. He knew the moment he had long dreaded had arrived. It was time to confront the truth, however painful. "Sophie, Claire," he signed gently, pulling back so the girls could see his hands. "I need you to be very brave right now. Can you stay here quietly for a minute? I'm going to talk to Mummy." The twins nodded, their wide, frightened eyes locked on Thomas. He gave them one more hug before getting up, his heart heavy with the responsibility he felt. He found Anne in the office, frantically rifling through drawers and cabinets. Papers and objects lay strewn on the floor, creating a scene of chaos that perfectly reflected her mental state. "Anne," he called softly, closing the door behind him. She spun around, her eyes wild and wide. "Thomas, good, you're here. Anne, we need to talk," Thomas interrupted firmly, taking a step toward her. "There's no time to talk," Anne exclaimed, her voice rising. "You don't understand, Thomas. I'm so close to curing them." Thomas shuddered. "Curing them? Anne, the girls aren't sick. They're deaf, yes, but that's not an illness." Anne paused in her frantic search, staring at Thomas with an intensity that made him step back. "You're wrong. They can be more, Thomas. They can be perfect. I can make them perfect." "What do you mean by make them perfect?" Thomas asked, dreading the answer. Anne began pacing, gesturing passionately. "I've done my research, Thomas. There are treatments, therapies. We can do surgeries, implants. They will hear, they will speak, they'll be like us." The horror of realization struck Thomas like a blow. "Anne, have you been forcing the girls into treatments?" "Not forcing," Anne shouted, voice breaking. "Helping." "So I'm helping them." Thomas took another step closer, hands outstretched in a calming gesture. "Anne, sweetheart, you need to stop. This isn't healthy. You're scaring the girls. You're hurting us." For a moment, Anne seemed to waver. Her eyes filled with tears and she fell to her knees, sobbing. "I just want the best for them, Thomas. I want them to be happy, to have a normal life." Thomas knelt beside her, placing a hesitant hand on her shoulder. "I know, Anne. I know you love them. But what you're doing, it isn't love. It's obsession." The words seemed to jolt Anne like an electric shock. She pulled away, her eyes once again hard and determined. "No, you're wrong. Everyone's wrong. I'm the only one who truly cares about their future." She rose quickly, rushing to the desk and yanking open a drawer. Thomas watched in horror as she pulled out a small medical kit. "What's that, Anne?" he asked, his voice shaky. "The solution," she replied, an eerie smile forming on her lips. "I was going to wait, do this when you were traveling. But now you'll see. You'll understand." Thomas positioned himself in front of the door. "Anna, whatever you're thinking of doing, please stop. Think about the girls. They're scared. They need us. They need to be cured," Anne shouted, stepping toward the door. "Get out of my way, Thomas. Don't make me." She didn't finish her sentence. but the implied threat hung in the air. Thomas's heart constricted at seeing the woman he loved, transformed into someone he barely recognized. "Anne, please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Think about what you're doing. This isn't you. The Anne I know, the one who became such a wonderful mother to Sophie and Claire, would never do this." For a moment, Thomas saw a flicker of recognition in Anne's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by iron resolve. "You leave me no choice, Thomas," she said, her voice dangerously calm. Before he could react, Anne grabbed a heavy vase from the table and hurled it at him. Thomas dodged, and it shattered against the wall behind him. Taking advantage of the distraction, Anne bolted for the door, shoving Thomas aside. He tried to grab her, but she struggled violently. "Anne, stop!" Thomas shouted, fighting to restrain her without harming her. "Let me go!" she screamed, her nails scratching Thomas's face. "They need me! I have to save them!" In the hallway, drawn by the commotion, Sophie and Claire appeared, their faces pale with fear. Upon seeing them, Anne seemed to gain renewed strength. "My girls," she gasped, extending her arms toward them. "Come with Mommy. We'll make you better." The twins backed away, clutching each other, terror evident in their eyes. In that moment, seeing the fear on Sophie and Claire's faces, Thomas made a painful decision. With a swift movement, he pushed Anne back into the office and locked the door, leaving her inside. Anne's screams and pounding against the door echoed through the house, merging with the twins' silent sobs and Thomas's ragged breathing. Holding the girls close, Thomas knew the situation had escalated beyond his control. The woman he loved was lost in a dangerous delusion, and the children they'd vowed to protect were terrified. With a broken heart but unwavering resolve, Thomas picked up the phone. It was time to seek outside help. Sophie and Claire's safety depended on it. As he dialed, Anne's screams continued, a chaotic symphony of rage and despair that would forever scar their family's memories. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the Laurent mansion, followed by a scream that chilled Thomas's blood. In a moment of distraction, while he was on the phone with authorities, Anne had broken down the office door. Thomas sprinted down the hall, heart in his throat, only to see Anne disappear into the twins' room, dragging Sophie and Claire with her. The click of the lock rang like a sentence. "Anne!" Thomas yelled, pounding on the door. "Anne, please, open up! Let's talk about this." On the other side, he could hear the muffled sobs of the girls and Anne's frantic voice. "Stay away, Thomas. You don't understand. I have to do this. I have to save them." Thomas pressed his forehead against the cold wood, fighting the panic threatening to consume him. "Anne, please, think about what you're doing. You're scaring them. They need us to be calm." For a moment, silence. Then Anne's shaky, unsure voice. I just want the best for them, Thomas. Why can't you see that?" Thomas took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know you love them, Anne. I know you want the best, but this isn't the way. Please, open the door. Let's talk, all of us, together." As he tried to negotiate, Thomas heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. He had asked for discretion when he called for help, fearing a visible police presence might agitate Anne further, but time was running out. "Anne," he tried again, "the girls need you. They need the loving mother you've been. Do you remember how they smiled when you first read them that story in sign language? That's the Anne they need now." A muffled sob came from inside the room. "I only wanted them to be normal, Thomas. I wanted to give them everything they never had before." Thomas's heart twisted. Beneath Anne's obsession lay a deep love and a genuine desire to help. But at some point, that love had become distorted into something dangerous. "They are normal, Anne," he said softly. "They're perfect, just the way they are, and you've already given them the most important things. Love, safety, a family." Soft footsteps down the corridor signaled the arrival of professional help. Thomas saw Dr. Elise Dubois, the psychiatrist he had contacted in an emergency, approach quietly, accompanied by 2 paramedics. He gestured for them to wait, not wanting to disrupt his fragile dialogue with Anne. "Anne," Thomas called again. "Do you remember the day we brought the girls home? How scared we were, not knowing what to do. But we learned together. We grew together. We can overcome this too, as a family." There was a tense silence, broken only by the occasional sobs of the twins. Then Anne's voice, almost a whisper. "I'm afraid, Thomas. What if I'm not a good mother to them? What if I'm not enough?" Thomas felt a wave of relief hearing Anne's vulnerability. It was a glimpse of the woman he knew, emerging from the swirl of obsession. "You're more than enough, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sophie and Claire love you exactly as you are, just like I do. We're a family, Anne, imperfect sometimes, confused, but united by love." There was a sound of movement inside, and then, to Thomas's immense relief, the lock clicked. The door opened slowly, revealing Anne, eyes red and swollen, holding Sophie and Claire's trembling hands. Thomas stepped forward, opening his arms. Anne hesitated for a moment, then, with a broken sob, moved into his embrace, pulling the girls in as well. "I'm sorry," she murmured through tears. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Thomas held her tightly, feeling the small hands of the twins gripping his legs. For a moment, they stayed like that, a family united in the midst of chaos. Gently, Dr. Dubois approached. "Mrs. Laurent," she said softly, "my name is Elise. I'm here to help. Could we talk for a bit?" Anne looked up, eyes wide as she took in the doctor and the paramedics. For an instant, Thomas feared she might panic again. But then, slowly, Anne nodded. I think I need help," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Dubois smiled kindly. "That's very brave of you to say. We'll take this one step at a time, all right?" As the doctor led Anne aside for a private conversation, the paramedics moved in to check on the twins. Thomas knelt, hugging Sophie and Claire firmly. "It's all right now," he signed, his fingers shaking. "You were both so brave. Daddy is very proud." The girls clung to him, their small bodies still trembling slightly. Thomas knew there was a long road ahead. Traumas had been created, trust had been shaken, but in that moment, feeling his daughter's warmth in his arms, he allowed himself a moment of relief. Hours later, with Anne voluntarily heading to a psychiatric evaluation and the twins finally asleep in their own bed, exhausted by the day's stress, Thomas found himself alone in the living room. The mansion, once a symbol of his success and happiness, now felt strangely empty and cold. Picking up a photo of his family, taken in happier times, with all of them smiling for the camera, Thomas felt hot tears roll down his cheeks. The day had been a nightmare, but also an awakening. The perfection Anne had so desperately sought did not exist. The true beauty of a family lay in its imperfections, in how they grew and learned together, overcoming challenges. As night fell, Thomas made a silent promise. He would fight for his family. He would fight to heal the wounds, rebuild trust, and find a new balance. Because, in the end, the love that bound them, imperfect, sometimes painful, but always real, was stronger than any obstacle. With that resolution in mind, Thomas finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that dawn would bring new challenges, but also new hopes for the Laurent family. The Laurent mansion, once a symbol of elegance and tranquility, was now surrounded by police cruisers and ambulances, their lights flashing quietly in the New York night. Inspector Claude Renard, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a serious expression, calmly and efficiently led the rescue operation. Inside the house, Thomas sat on the living room couch, his face pale and tense as Inspector Renard explained the situation. "Mr. Laurent?" Renard began, his voice low and controlled. "We understand your wife is in a fragile emotional state and that the children might be in danger. Our priority is ensuring everyone's safety." Thomas nodded, feeling both grateful for the help and guilty that it had come to this. "What can we do? We have a specialist negotiator, Dr. Martin Lefebvre, who will attempt to establish communication with your wife," Renard explained. "But we need your help, Mr. Laurent. You know your wife better than anyone." At that moment, Dr. Lefebvre, an empathetic woman in her early 40s, approached. "Mr. Laurent, can you tell me exactly what happened before your wife locked herself in with the girls?" Thomas took a deep breath, recounting the chaotic events of the last few hours. He explained Anne's escalating obsession with curing the twins, her erratic behavior, and the confrontation that led to the current standoff. Dr. Lefebvre listened carefully, occasionally jotting down notes. And the girls, they really can't hear. Yes, Sophie and Claire are deaf, Thomas confirmed. We communicate through sign language. A spark of interest lit Dr. Lefebvre's eyes. That might be helpful. Mr. Laurentin, would you be able to communicate with the girls without your wife noticing? Thomas considered this for a moment. Yes, I think so. But how? We'll position you so the girls can see you through the bedroom window, Dr. Lefebvre explained. You can use signs to reassure them, maybe even instruct them on how we can help. The plan went into action quickly. Heart pounding, Thomas was escorted outside to the garden, carefully stationed beneath the window of the room where Anne and the twins were barricaded. Meanwhile, Dr. Lefebvre approached the bedroom door. Mrs. Laurent, she called softly. My name is Martine. I'm here to help. Can we talk? Inside the room, Anne clutched the twins closer, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Go away, she shouted. You don't understand. I have to protect them. While Dr. Lefebvre tried to calm Anne, Thomas focused on the twins. Through the partially covered window, he could see Sophie and Claire's frightened faces. Slowly, carefully, he began signing. It's all right, he signed. Daddy is here. You're both very brave. The girls' eyes grew wide at the sight of him, relief and fear mingling in their expressions. Mommy is scared, Thomas continued. She needs help. Can you help? Sophie and Claire exchanged glances, then nodded hesitantly. Inside the room, Dr. Lefebvre carried on her gentle approach. Anne, I know you love your daughters. I know you want the best for them. But what's happening now is frightening them. We can work together to help them. Anne hesitated, her determination visibly wavering. I just want them to be happy, to have a normal life. They can have a happy, fulfilled life exactly as they are, Dr. Lefebvre assured her. And with the love you have for them, I'm sure they're already on the right path. Meanwhile, Thomas continued silently communicating with the twins. When I give the signal, I want you to hug Mommy really tight, okay? Show her how much you love her. The girls nodded, understanding the importance of their mission. Tension hovered in the air. Dr. Lefebvre, sensing a breakthrough, took a step closer. Anne, how about unlocking the door so we can talk more openly? I'm sure Thomas is worried about you and wants to see that you and the girls are all right. There was a moment of agonizing silence. Then, to everyone's relief, they heard the click of the lock being released. The door opened slowly, revealing Anne, pale and trembling, the twins clinging to her. Thomas who had rushed back inside, gave the subtle cue they had agreed upon. At that instant, the girls wrapped Anne in a tight hug, their small hands forming signs for love and family. The unexpected gesture took Anne by surprise, and she sank to her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Oh, my babies, she sobbed. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Thomas approached carefully, joining the group hug. It's all right, Anne, he murmured. We're here, all of us. Dr. Lefebvre watched the scene with a mix of relief and compassion. With a discreet signal, she indicated for the paramedics to come closer. Anne, she said kindly, you've been very brave today, but I think you could benefit from some extra help. What do you say we go somewhere you can rest and talk to professionals who can help you work through all of this? For a moment, fear flashed in Anne's eyes, but then she looked at the twins, at Thomas, and finally nodded. I think I need help, she admitted quietly. Gently and respectfully, the paramedics approached to assess Anne and the children. Thomas stayed by his wife's side the entire time, holding her hand as she was prepared for transport. Before she was taken away, Anne looked at Thomas, her eyes filled with regret and fear. You'll take care of them. Promise. Thomas nodded, tears in his eyes. Always. And we'll be waiting for you, Anne. All of us. As the ambulance pulled away, carrying Anne off to the treatment she so desperately needed, Thomas hugged Sophie and Claire. The worst was over, but he knew the road to healing would be long and challenging. Gazing at his daughters, Thomas felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The night had tested their love, courage, and resilience. But it had also shown the power of communication, empathy, and unconditional love. With a deep sigh, Thomas guided the girls back into the mansion. The new day would bring fresh challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, as a family, they would face whatever lay ahead. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions and responsibilities for Thomas Laurent. The mansion, once a place of peace and joy, now felt strangely empty without Anne's presence. The silence that had once been comforting now weighed like an oppressive cloak over the fragmented family. Thomas found himself torn between visits to the psychiatric hospital where Anne was admitted, meetings with lawyers to handle possible legal ramifications of the incident, and the most important job of all, caring for Sophie and Claire, visibly shaken by recent events. One particularly grey morning, Thomas found himself in the office of Dr. Elise Dubois, the psychiatrist who had been instrumental during the crisis and now oversaw Anne's treatment. "How is she, doctor?" Thomas asked, his voice betraying the accumulated fatigue of many sleepless nights. Dr. Dubois adjusted her glasses, sympathy in her gaze. "Anne is responding well to the initial treatment, Mr. Laurent. But it's crucial to understand this will be a long process. She's not only coping with the recent episode, but also with deep-rooted traumas and insecurities." Thomas nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "And what about the girls? Will they be able to see her?" "For now, we think it best to keep visits restricted to you," the doctor replied. "Anne needs to stabilize before handling the complexities of her relationship with the twins. Speaking of which, how are Sophie and Claire doing?" Thomas exhaled deeply. "They're scared, confused. They've been having nightmares. I feel lost, doctor. How can I help them move on?" Dr. Dubois offered a gentle smile. "This is why I recommended Dr. Amélie Rousseau. She specializes in child therapy and has experience working with deaf children. I believe she can be a great help to the girls and to you as well, Mr. Laurent." That same afternoon, Thomas took Sophie and Claire to their first session with Dr. Rousseau. Her office was warm and inviting, decorated with bright colors and carefully chosen toys. The therapist, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, greeted the girls in fluent sign language, immediately putting them more at ease. Watching their initial interaction, Thomas felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. It hurt to see his daughters needing professional help to cope with trauma, but he was grateful they had access to it. After the session, Dr. Rousseau asked Thomas to step in for a private conversation. "Mr. Laurent," she began, her tone serious yet kind, "during our session, I noticed something intriguing about Sophie and Claire, something I believe needs further investigation." Thomas felt his heart speed up. "What is it, doctor?" "Well, during some of our exercises, the girls seem to react to certain sounds in a way that isn't typical of completely deaf children," Dr. Rousseau explained. "I'd like to suggest more thorough hearing tests." The revelation struck Thomas like lightning. "Are you saying they can hear?" Dr. Rousseau raised her hands in a calming gesture. "I don't want to raise false hopes, Mr. Laurent, but there's a possibility Sophie and Claire have residual hearing that wasn't detected before. Or maybe the trauma they experienced before you found them led to selective mutism, which has also affected their response to auditory stimuli." Thomas felt his world spin. The possibility that the twins might have some degree of hearing, or that their silence was a product of trauma rather than profound deafness, was overwhelming. In the days that followed, Sophie and Claire underwent a series of tests and evaluations. Thomas observed anxiously through each procedure, his heart swinging between hope and fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the results arrived. Dr. Martin Lefebvre, a specialist in pediatric audiology, sat down with Thomas to discuss the findings. "Mr. Laurent," he began, his professional tone calm, "the results are, frankly, surprising. Sophie and Claire are not as profoundly deaf as was initially believed. They have a significant amount of residual hearing in both ears." Tears pricked Thomas's eyes. "But why have they never—" Dr. Lefebvre continued, "Based on the exams and the history we've been given, we believe the girls developed a form of selective mutism as a response to severe trauma. They effectively shut down their ability to process sounds and speech as a coping mechanism. Thomas's mind reeled at the implications. So, they can learn to talk, to hear normally. With proper therapy and a lot of support, yes, there's a good chance, the doctor replied. But it's important to understand this will be a long and challenging process. The trauma that caused this condition needs to be dealt with carefully. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Thomas sat in the living room, the silent house echoing his tumultuous thoughts. The irony of the situation did not escape him. Anne, in her obsession to cure the twins, had never imagined they might actually have the potential to hear and speak. With a heavy sigh, Thomas picked up the phone. He knew he needed to share this news with Anne, but he feared her reaction. His conversation with Dr. Dubois was brief, but intense. They agreed Anne would be informed gradually, as part of her therapeutic process. As he prepared for bed, Thomas reflected on the remarkable journey his family had taken. A chance encounter on a stormy night led to a profound love, a devastating crisis, and now this startling revelation. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks, Thomas felt a spark of true hope. Sophie and Claire had a long way to go. So did Anne. But armed with the truth and determined to provide all the support they needed, Thomas felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The silence that had defined so much of their lives was about to be broken, not just by sound, but by the promise of healing, understanding, and deeper love. With that resolution, Thomas finally allowed himself a peaceful sleep, knowing dawn would bring fresh challenges, but also new possibilities for the Laurent family. Morning arrived at the Laurent mansion with a quiet promise of change. Thomas, already awake for hours, watched the sunrise from the terrace, his mind swirling with thoughts and emotions. The revelations of the past few days weighed on him. Sophie and Claire were not actually deaf, but deeply traumatized. Their silence was not a physical condition, but an emotional fortress built for protection. With a heavy sigh, Thomas went back inside, preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most challenging days of his life. Under Dr. Rousseau's guidance, they would begin the process of breaking down the silence that had defined the twins for so long. When Sophie and Claire came down for breakfast, Thomas greeted them with a warm smile, though his eyes betrayed his apprehension. "Good morning, my princesses," he signed, as he did every morning. But today his hands trembled slightly. The girls returned his sign, their faces curious about their father's obvious tension. After breakfast, Thomas led them to the living room, where Dr. Rousseau was already waiting. She greeted the twins with a gentle smile, inviting them to sit on the soft rug surrounded by carefully chosen toys. "Sophie, Claire," she began, both speaking and signing with gentle movements. "Today we're going to play a special game, a game of sounds and words. It's all right if you don't feel like participating or if you want to stop at any point. We're here to help and support you, okay?" The twins exchanged anxious glances but slowly nodded. Thomas, sitting nearby, felt his heart race. Dr. Rousseau started with simple sounds, a small bell ringing, the soft roar of a plush toy. To Thomas's shock and delight, the girls reacted, sometimes with a slight jump, other times with a fleeting spark of recognition in their eyes. Gradually, the therapist introduced simple words, speaking clearly while showing corresponding objects. "Ball," she said, holding up a bright-colored ball. "Flower," while displaying a plastic daisy. The moment that changed everything came when Dr. Rousseau held up a small photograph of Thomas. "Daddy," she said gently. Sophie, the more daring of the two, furrowed her brow in concentration. Her lips moved silently as though testing the word. Then, in the faintest whisper, Die." Time seemed to stand still. Thomas felt tears spring to his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. Claire, encouraged by her sister, repeated the sound. "Daddy?" Dr. Rousseau maintained her professional composure, but her eyes shone with emotion. "Very good, girls," she praised in both signs and words. "You're very brave." Thomas wanted to rush over and hug them, to tell them how much he loved them, but he knew he needed to be patient, let them progress at their own pace. In the days that followed, Sophie and Claire took hesitant yet firm steps toward the world of sounds and spoken words. Each new word was a victory, each sound a revelation. Water, please, thank you. Simple expressions that for any other family would be routine, but for the Lawrence were daily miracles. However, with progress came new challenges. As the twins opened themselves to a world of sound, long-buried memories began to surface. Nightmares became frequent, the girls waking up screaming, a sound that was both terrifying and miraculous to Thomas. It was during one of these difficult nights that the truth of the twins' past began to emerge. Thomas was comforting Sophie after a particularly intense nightmare when she whispered between sobs, "Bad man," shouted a lot. Thomas's heart tightened. Gently, he asked, "Who shouted, sweetheart?" "The man and before you, Daddy," Sophie answered, her voice quivering. "He hurt us. He made scary noises." The puzzle pieces began to fit. Thomas remembered the rainy night he found the twins, alone and terrified. How many horrors had they faced before that? In subsequent sessions with Dr. Rousseau, more details emerged. The twins had been abused, exposed to constant screaming and violence. Their silence had been not only a defense against the horrible sounds they experienced, but also a way to become invisible, to avoid attracting their abusers' attention. Learning these truths devastated Thomas. Countless nights he spent awake, tormented by visions of what his daughters had endured. Yet along with the pain came a fierce determination to help them heal, protect them, and love them unconditionally. Their path to recovery took on a new urgency. Thomas worked tirelessly with Dr. Rousseau and a team of specialists to create a healing environment for Sophie and Claire. Speech therapy combined with play therapy and art therapy gave the girls safe ways to process their experiences. During this time, Thomas also dealt with Anne's reaction to these revelations. In carefully monitored visits to the psychiatric facility, he gradually shared the discoveries about the twins. Anne's response was a complex blend of shock, guilt, and, surprisingly, relief. "I knew, somehow, I knew there was more," Anne said in one of those visits, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wanted so badly to help them, but I did everything wrong." Thomas squeezed his wife's hand, feeling a combination of love and forgiveness. "We all made mistakes, Anne. What matters is that we now know how to really help them." As the weeks turned into months, the Laurent mansion was once again filled with sound. Hesitant laughter, whispered words, even gentle songs crooned in shy, unsteady voices. Every new sound was a victory, every spoken word another step toward healing. One night, as Thomas tucked the girls into bed, Claire tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice still a bit rough from lack of use. "Tell a story." Thomas felt his heart overflow with love and gratitude. "Of course, sweetheart," he replied, voice thick with emotion. "Which story would you like to hear?" "Ours," Sophie chimed in, snuggling closer. "Tell us how you found us." As Thomas began recounting that rainy night that changed their lives forever, he realized they were writing a new chapter together, one of healing, resilience, and unconditional love. The silence was broken now, and though the road ahead would still be long and sometimes hard, Thomas knew that together, he, Anne, Sophie, and Claire, they would find their voice and their strength. The Laurent family was finally learning to speak the language of love, healing, and hope. Fall arrived in New York with golden and red hues, mirroring the profound changes taking place inside the Laurent mansion. Leaves drifted lazily to the ground in the garden, where Sophie and Claire played under Thomas's watchful eye. Their laughter, once so rare, now filled the air more and more often. "Daddy, look!" Sophie shouted, her voice still slightly hesitant but full of excitement. She had built a small tower of colorful leaves. Thomas smiled, amazed at his daughter's progress. Just a few months ago, a shout of joy like that would have been unthinkable. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he replied, keenly aware of how precious each verbal interaction was. Therapy sessions with Dr. Rousseau had become the family's focal point, taking place 3 times a week. The twins immersed themselves in a world of therapeutic games, speech exercises, and activities tailored to help them process their past trauma. Thomas watched with a mix of pride and heartache as Sophie and Claire, through games and drawings, revealed glimpses of their earlier experiences. Dolls representing bad people were banished to time out, while father figures were depicted as heroic saviors. "It's normal for them to project a lot onto you right now, Dr. Russo explained during one of Thomas's parent counseling sessions. "You represent safety and unconditional love, but be careful not to put too much pressure on yourself to be perfect." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll do something wrong and traumatize them even more," he admitted. Dr. Rousseau smiled gently. "Thomas Gound, the fact that you worry so much already shows you're on the right track. The key is consistency, love, and patience. And don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Following the therapist's advice, Thomas began setting aside time for his own well-being. Long walks in the park, meditation sessions, and even some therapy sessions for adults to process his own fears and feelings. At home, the routine adapted to the twins' evolving needs. Evenings, once silent, were now filled with bedtime stories, lullabies hummed softly, and whispered conversations. Thomas learned to recognize the girls' signs of anxiety, responding with calm and reassurance. "It's all right to be scared," he would say softly when a nightmare startled one of them awake. "But remember, you're safe now. Daddy's here." Gradually, the nighttime panic attacks became less frequent. Sophie and Claire began sleeping better, their dreams increasingly free from the shadows of the past. The progress wasn't limited to the twins, many miles away, in the psychiatric hospital where Anne was staying. Another healing journey was underway. Thomas visited regularly, watching with relief and hope as changes took shape in his wife. The frantic, obsessive look had given way to reflective calm. Therapy sessions and proper medication were helping Anne confront her own demons. "How are the girls?" Anne would invariably ask during each visit, her tone a mixture of love and apprehension. Thomas, guided by the medical team, carefully shared Sophie and Claire's progress. "They're talking more every day," he mentioned one time. "Claire even asked to hear music yesterday." Anne's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry for everything, Thomas, for not seeing what they really needed." Thomas held her hand, feeling that familiar blend of love and forgiveness. "We're all learning, Anne. The important thing is that we're on the right track now." As Anne's treatment progressed, the possibility of a family reunion came under discussion. Dr. Dubois, who oversaw Anne's case, brought up the topic gently during a meeting with Thomas. "Anne has made significant progress," the doctor explained. "We believe she's ready to begin a gradual reintegration, but it must be done carefully, especially considering the twins' delicate situation." Thomas nodded, torn between anxiety and hope. "How do we proceed?" Dr. Dubois outlined a cautious plan. First, supervised video calls between Anne and the twins, followed by short, monitored visits at the hospital. Only if all went well would Anne begin brief visits to the mansion. Preparing for this crucial moment involved the entire support team. Dr. Rousseau worked intensively with Sophie and Claire, helping them articulate their feelings about their mother and preparing them for the reunion. "Mommy was sick," Thomas explained gently to the girls during one of these preparatory sessions. "But she's getting better now, and she loves you both very much." The girls' reactions were mixed. Claire seemed eager, while Sophie remained more cautious. "Will she still make us listen to loud music?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas's heart squeezed. "No, sweetheart. Mommy understands now that wasn't good for you. She just wants love and hugs if you're ready for that." The first video call was tense and emotional. Anne, visibly nervous, gave a shy smile at the camera. "Hello, my little ones," she said softly. Sophie and Claire, perched on Thomas's lap, waved hesitantly. The conversation was brief and somewhat awkward, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, calls became more frequent and relaxed. The twins began sharing small stories from their daily lives, while Anne listened with genuine interest, asking caring questions and offering words of encouragement. Finally, the day for the first hospital visit arrived. Thomas drove there with the girls, his heart pounding. In Anne's room, decorated with artwork the girls had sent, the family reunited for the first time in months. The encounter was filled with conflicting emotions. There were tears, hesitant hugs, and many words of love and regret. Following her guidance, Anne remained calm and welcoming, allowing the twins to set the pace of interaction. As they were about to leave, Claire surprised everyone by turning to Anne and clearly saying, "See you soon, Mommy. I love you." The room fell silent for a moment as they all processed those simple words. Anne, tears in her eyes, answered gently, "I love you too, my dear, thank you." On the drive back home, Thomas reflected on how far they had come and how much lay ahead. Healing wasn't a destination but a continuous journey. There would be tough days ahead, moments of doubt and possibly setbacks, but watching Sophie and Claire doze peacefully in the back seat, Thomas felt a wave of hope. They were making progress, step by step, word by word, hug by hug. And together, as a family, they would keep forging down the path of healing, love, and understanding. Morning dawned with a gentle mist over New York, as if the city itself sought to create a welcoming atmosphere for the crucial moment at hand. In the Laurent mansion, Thomas rose before the alarm, his stomach in knots with both anxiety and hope. Today would be the first time Anne returned home since the incident, for a supervised visit with the twins. While preparing breakfast, Thomas mentally recited the instructions from Dr. Rousseau and Dr. Dubois. The visit would be short, just a few hours, and both the twins' therapist and Anne's psychiatrist would be present to ensure it went smoothly. Sophie and Claire came down the stairs hand in hand, their faces mirroring a blend of excitement and nervousness. Thomas greeted them with an encouraging smile. "Good morning, my princesses," he said, helping them settle at the table. "You remember what we talked about?" "Mommy's special visit today." Claire nodded timidly, while Sophie bit her lip before asking, "Mommy's coming home?" "Yes, sweetheart," Thomas confirmed gently, "but remember, it's just a short visit, and Dr. Rousseau will be here the whole time." The following hours were a whirlwind of preparations. Thomas made sure the house looked welcoming, removing anything that might trigger painful memories. The twins insisted on making welcome cards for Anne, a gesture that filled Thomas's heart with emotion. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Thomas took a deep breath, gave the girls one last reassuring look, and opened the door. Anne stood there, looking both familiar and unfamiliar. Her face, once so strained by obsession and anxiety, now showed a cautious serenity, yet her eyes betrayed hope and apprehension. "Welcome home," Thomas said softly, extending his hand. Anne accepted his gesture, a shy smile flickering across her lips. "Thank you, Thomas. It's good to be home." Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rousseau, who was already inside with the twins. She stepped into the hallway. "Let's take this slowly," she reminded them kindly, "one step at a time." Anne walked hesitantly into the living room. Sophie and Claire, still seated on the sofa, looked up, their eyes wide. For a moment, silence filled the air, laden with memories and unspoken emotions. Claire broke the stalemate, slowly standing and walking toward Anne, handing her the welcome card she had made. "Welcome, Mommy," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. Anne knelt to be at eye level, tears glistening. "Thank you, my love," she managed, accepting the card with trembling hands. "May I give you a hug?" Claire hesitated briefly, then nodded. The hug was brief but genuine, and when they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. Sophie watched, her face reflecting a swirl of emotions. Thomas sat beside her, offering silent support. Slowly, Sophie also approached, holding out her own card. "It's very pretty, Sophie," Anne praised softly. "You've always been so talented at drawing." A small smile tugged at Sophie's lips. "Thank you," she murmured. At Dr. Rousseau's suggestion, they all sat down, beginning a carefully guided conversation. Anne, following her therapist's advice, let the girls lead the interaction, answering their questions with honesty and sensitivity. "Are you still sick, Mommy?" Claire asked at one point. Anne exchanged a quick glance with Dr. Dubois before replying, "I was sick, yes, sweetheart, but I'm getting better every day, and I'm learning how to be a better mommy to you." Sophie, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke up. "You won't make us do things we don't want anymore." The question hit Anne like a punch to the gut. Thomas instinctively leaned forward, ready to intervene, but Dr. Rousseau signaled him to wait. Anne took a deep breath, tears spilling freely now. "No, Sophie. Never again. I'm so very sorry for everything I did. I thought I was helping, but I was wrong, so wrong. You two are perfect just the way you are, and I love you unconditionally." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with emotion. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sophie stood up and walked to Anne. For a moment, she just looked into her mother's eyes. Slowly, she opened her arms. The hug that followed was a profound moment of healing. Anne held Sophie gently, her quiet sobs shaking them both. Claire joined in, and for several precious minutes, mother and daughters reconnected in a way that went beyond words. Thomas watched, tears on his own face. Dr. Rousseau placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "This is a good start," she murmured. As the afternoon went on, the atmosphere in the living room gradually lightened. Anne listened intently to the girls' stories of therapy, new interests, and progress in speaking. Thomas noticed how cautious she was not to push, letting them share at their own pace. When it was time for Anne to leave, a wave of tension resurfaced. The twins, now somewhat accustomed again to their mother's presence, seemed reluctant to let her go. "I'll come back for another visit soon," Anne promised, her voice soft but firm. "And we can keep doing video calls if you'd like." Sophie and Claire nodded, their expressions a mix of sadness and hope, as Thomas escorted Anne and Dr. Dubois to the door. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions. There was still a long road ahead, but today they had taken a crucial step toward healing. "Thank you, Thomas," Anne said softly before leaving, "for not giving up on our family." Thomas merely nodded, a knot in his throat preventing him from speaking. He watched as Anne got into the car, giving one last wave to the girls peering out from the window. Back inside, Thomas hugged Sophie and Claire. "You both were very brave today," he said, kissing the tops of their heads. "Daddy," Claire asked in a small voice, "will Mommy come back home one day?" Thomas exchanged a look with Dr. Rousseau before replying carefully, "Maybe, sweetheart. Let's take it one step at a time, okay? What's important is that we're all working together to feel better and be happy." That night, as he tucked the girls into bed, Thomas reflected on the intense day. The road to reconciliation and forgiveness would be long and, at times, painful. There would be tough days ahead, moments of doubt and maybe even setbacks. But today, they had taken the first hesitant steps toward reunification. In those steps, Thomas saw a glimmer of hope, the promise that, with love, patience, and understanding, the Laurent family could not only heal but become stronger than ever. Spring arrived in New York, carrying with it a promise of renewal that resonated deeply within the Laurent mansion. After months of intensive treatment, supervised visits, and a painstaking reconciliation process, the day Thomas had both longed for and feared finally arrived. Anne was coming home. The morning began early, with Thomas double-checking every detail in the house. The twins, Sophie and Claire, now 7 years old, helped in their own way by placing fresh flowers in vases and hanging welcome banners they'd lovingly created. "Daddy," Claire called, her voice clear and confident in a way that still surprised him. "Do you think Mommy will like the decorations?" Thomas smiled, kneeling to meet his daughter's gaze. "I'm sure she'll love them, sweetheart. You both did an amazing job." Sophie, always the more cautious, inched closer. What if things get weird again?" Thomas's heart tightened. Even after all their progress, the fear still lurked. "Do you remember what Dr. Rousseau taught us? We'll take it one day at a time together. And if something worries us, we'll talk about it. Okay?" The girls nodded, exchanging looks that spoke volumes about their shared bond and mutual support. At exactly 11 a.m., the sound of a car pulling into the driveway caused everyone to freeze momentarily. Thomas exhaled, gave the twins one last reassuring smile, and went to open the door. Anne was there, standing on the threshold with a small suitcase by her side. She looked simultaneously familiar and different. Her face, once haunted by obsession, now held a cautious serenity. However, her eyes shone with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Welcome back," Thomas said softly. extending his hand. Anne took it, a tentative smile forming. "Thank you, Thomas." "It's good to be home." Their moment was interrupted by quick footsteps, and suddenly Sophie and Claire were there, their faces reflecting a whirl of emotions. "Mommy!" Claire exclaimed, the first to rush forward with a hug. Anne knelt, carefully embracing her, as though afraid her daughter might break. "Hello, my love," she murmured, tears shining in her eyes. Sophie hesitated a moment longer, but then joined the hug as well. "We missed you," she said quietly. "I missed you both so much," Anne replied, voice trembling with emotion, "more than I can ever express." The first few days were an exercise in adjustment for everyone. Anne moved through the house with reverence, as though relearning her place in it. Thomas watched carefully, ready to offer help or intervene if needed. The twins alternated between delight at having their mother back and moments of uncertainty, remnants of the past trauma that still needed time to heal. One evening during dinner, Claire accidentally knocked over a glass of water. For an instant, terror crossed her face, a memory of when a small mistake could trigger an outburst. Sensing her daughter's fear, Anne quickly reassured her. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "Accidents happen. Let's clean it up together, all right?" Claire's relief was evident, and Thomas felt a surge of pride at how Anne handled the situation. As days became weeks, a new routine emerged. Family therapy sessions, now including Anne, served as a focal point, a safe space where everyone expressed their feelings and worked together to heal old wounds. During one of these sessions, Sophie, typically the more reserved twin, finally mustered the courage to voice her deepest fears. "Sometimes," she began, her voice quivering slightly, "I'm afraid everything will go back to how it was before, that Mommy will get angry again and try to make us change." Anne felt those words like a dagger to her heart, but thanks to her extensive treatment, she managed to respond calmly and empathetically. "Sophie, my love," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I understand your fear. What I did was very wrong, and I'm so sorry I scared you and your sister. But I need you to know I'm working hard every day to be a better mum. You two are perfect just the way you are, and my job is to love and protect you, not change you." Tears ran freely down Sophie's cheeks, and soon the entire family was in an emotional embrace, words replaced by a profound moment of connection and healing. As summer approached with longer, warmer days, the Lawrence began planning for a special occasion, the twins' birthday. It would be the first big celebration since Anne's return, and everyone was determined to make it memorable for all the right reasons. On the day of the party, the mansion's garden transformed into a children's paradise. Colorful balloons, a table laden with treats, and an elaborate cake decorated with musical notes, a nod to the girls' love for music, now appreciated on their own terms. School friends, therapists who had become almost part of the family, and even a few carefully chosen relatives gathered to celebrate not only Sophie and Claire's birthday, but also the rebirth of the Laurent family. The most moving moment came when the candles were lit. Thomas and Anne, standing side by side, watched with full hearts as their daughters got ready to make a wish. "Wait," Sophie said suddenly, surprising everyone. "Can I say something first?" All eyes turned to her as she took a deep breath and began, "I want to thank all of you, Daddy, for always protecting us, Mommy, for working so hard to get better, Claire for being the best sister in the world, and everyone else who helped us. Our wish," she glanced at Claire, who nodded in agreement, "is that we can keep being like this, a family that loves and takes care of each other." Not a single eye was dry in the garden when the girls finally blew out the candles, their faces lit not just by the flames, but by genuine joy. Later that evening, once the party was over and the exhausted girls were asleep, Thomas and Anne sat on the veranda, gazing at the stars. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" Anne asked softly. Thomas took her hand, feeling the wedding ring that still symbolized their commitment. "There were times I doubted," he admitted, "but I never gave up hope entirely." Anne nodded, tears gleaming in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on us." As the night wore on, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary journey his family had taken, from silence to sound, from fear to trust, from pain to healing. It had not been an easy road, and he knew there would still be challenges ahead. But looking at his wife, thinking of his daughters asleep upstairs, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had faced silence, physical and emotional, that threatened to tear them apart. In its place, they had built something beautiful, a symphony of love, forgiveness, and resilience. The Laurent mansion, once a place of secrets and pain, now echoed with laughter, music, and open conversation, a living testament to the power of unconditional love, the strength of family, and humanity's capacity to overcome even the darkest challenges. As the first shooting star streaked across the sky, Thomas made a silent wish that his family would continue to grow, learn, and love, always finding their voice, even in the quietest moments.